This is the F Words podcast with Dr Leandra Brady-Walker.
It's really, really good.
Where we have the difficult conversations. Stuff that we don't want to talk about or even think about, but should.
We should do it because we have to do it.
The tricky, uncomfortable things like fornication.
Effing important things.
Finances, fertility.
Things like fannies.
And all the other F words. This is less tea with the neighbours and more drinks with your girlfriends. Nothing is off limits. And here is Leandra, your host, the Cosmopolitan Hippie.
So glad you could join me for episode 28, where our F word is fierce. In this episode, I talk to Ricci-Jane. So sometimes I go looking for guests, sometimes I look for topics, but for a while now I've been mulling over the question, can you be all send-out goddess and still change the world? Is there space inside one person to be fierce and at peace? The two seem mutually exclusive to me, but Ricci, however, disagrees. She believes that you can be both, and she calls it being spiritually fierce. So 3 times Ricci had been presented to me, and I knew the universe was telling me I had to speak to this lady, and I'm really glad I did. This was an eye-opening and quite soothing conversation at the same time. Make sure you listen out for the best parenting advice I have ever heard given by Ricci. So this is the F Words. I'm your host, Leandra, and let's get our fierce on. So my 4-year-old just got described by her kinder teacher as fierce.
Such a big word, and I think we can really unpack that and really look at what it is that it means when we use it and how we use it, you know, the qualities that we associate with it, because I think it's an evolving word as well. I think the meaning is kind of developing and changing over time, and
Well, Beyonce has taken the word and kind of empowered it. Yeah, because she talks a lot about being Sasha fierce and being fierce and things, and I don't know, I think it's a good thing. I think it's an awesome thing for especially like little girls to be called fierce.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I agree. And I think it's that thing of the way language develops, that it represents power to me. And power isn't always about, you know, it's not the masculine idea of power either. The feminine version of power is very much coming from a receptive power, which is much more about, I sit back here on my throne in my queendom and I let that which is mine come to me. And I think that's a really interesting kind of take on it, rather than this force that is so often associated with power. It's taking from the other, whereas the fierce power, the feminine power is that which is mine will come to me with ease and grace. And I don't have to panic or stress or run around. Everything is preordained. And, you know, there's some big spiritual ideas in there, but we can break them down as we go along.
I love that. I got tingles. I actually got tingles when you were saying that. It's really because, one of the things that I struggle with, right, I want to make a big dent in the world, and I want to go out there and, like, do stuff and, like, be stuff and, like, you know, be like a mover and a shaker and a disruptor. Where do you draw that line between, like, sitting back and being, like, you know, quiet and being zen-like and still being able to go forth and make these big changes? Like, where do you find that balance?
Well, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And I think that's a big problem with the spiritual conversation very often, is that we think that if we're going to attain peace and sit in meditation and do all of those things, which as a spiritual seeker are vital to me, that then makes us kind of ineffective in the world. And that's actually the opposite. We live in a new age. We live in a new paradigm. There is no point being a spiritual seeker if you will not go forward and use that peace and that understanding and that compassion to transform the world, because we have a world in crisis. We are in an extraordinary age, and humanity is going through an incredible up-leveling process, and those who can lead must. Therefore, that power that you exert upon the world is not force. Once again, it's going out and I love this term from Ken Wilber, shaking the spiritual tree, and it came up in another podcast interview recently, that idea that it's not enough for us to attain inner peace for ourselves. It's not enough for us to have our nice little lives and our comfortable little plots in suburbia where we've got all our shit together. We must take ourselves out into the world and offer what we have to those who are still deeply enmeshed in their grief, their pain, their anger. And we need to be safe to see that spirituality is sometimes the passive stillness and sometimes it is the fierce warrior. And both those qualities are required if we're going to serve. So for me, spiritual practices without a mandate mandate of service mean nothing. Otherwise, it's just, self-indulgent narcissism. And we've got enough narcissists on the planet. We have an epidemic of narcissism because we have overemphasized individuality since the time of the Enlightenment. We've been all about individual personal power, and that needed to happen. We needed to reclaim our power from institutions like religion. And now that we have done that, we've kind of gone too far in the other extreme. It's all about me. It's all about what I can get for myself. And we see this in characters such as the Kardashians, where narcissism in the extreme is bowed down to like it's the new religion. And instead of collective action, imagine what the Kardashians could do to change the world if they decided to have a mandate for something other than their own butts. Like, God bless them. They are strong women, but they're women without an inner compass that says, I need to, as Michelle Obama says, lean back to take what I have created and use it as a force for good at a community level, whatever your community is. And it might be, as you say, I want to change the world. I want the whole world to be served by this awakening. Or it might be just your tribe. But to think that it's enough in this extraordinary age, this age of crisis, just for us to act as individual units is the ultimate form of narcissism. And I don't care if you're doing that spiritually or if you're doing it as a Kardashian. Either way, it's not good enough. We have to go forward. So I think we can be both, my darling. Absolutely.
Well, that's brilliant because,
problem solved.
That's it, done. Podcast over. Because there's so many times, that I've always wanted to be this Zen-like sitting down, like I let things wash over me and I don't let things get in. But I just feel that's, I don't know, I just don't feel that I was put on this earth to sit in a room and meditate and be like Zen-like and fantastic.
No, it's not that time anymore. Caroline Myss calls it being a mystic without walls. We're no longer in the monasteries. We're no longer in the caves in the mountains just meditating our whole lives. Time has literally sped up. We are in an accelerated time. We are doing in one life what it may be, because I believe in reincarnation, would have taken us 10 lives to achieve. So you're absolutely right. We are no longer in the age where you can spend a whole lifetime just devoting yourself to that inner life. You need to take action in the world. But here's the difference. You must begin with the meditation and the stillness, because then you are honoring your true nature, which is energy first, physical second. You need to detach from the idea that the real world has any capacity to actually cause you any harm, because it doesn't. It's simply a reflection of your belief about it. So if you change your mind by changing your consciousness, by going into your devotional practices, you will find yourself already in a new paradigm. But that doesn't mean that you let the injustices of the world pass you by. Yes. It means that, yes, you take action from a place of love, not from a place of fear. You take action from a place of love, righteous love, rather than a place of anger and rage. Because if you attack the world because you see it as an unloving, bad place, what are you doing to the world? You're giving it more of the same shit that you're trying to overcome. So love is our only weapon. And that does not mean that we be passive and we condone, because that is also not what we're saying. This is spiritually fierce in a nutshell. To be spiritually fierce means that you choose love first. You choose to see a loving, benevolent world wherever you go, but you don't let the injustices pass you by. You just choose to take loving action. And sometimes that means picking up a sword, and sometimes that means picking up a pen, and sometimes that means, recording a podcast. But you do not let fear be your motivator, because otherwise you are perpetuating the suffering. There are 3 immutable laws that govern the entire cosmos. And the first law is the law of mentalism. And the law of mentalism says that all is of the one mind. Now, quantum physics has demonstrated this to us with the unified field, the theory of the unified field of everything, and the idea that all is one, that you cannot be a passive watcher of life. There are no observers in the quantum field. And at the quantum level, that's all we are. What we see in the mirror is only a tiny percentage of our true nature. We are vibrating particles of matter. Those vibrating particles are producing a field. That field is influencing the field of everything else around it. So you're influencing your children. The chair that you're sitting on has a field. Everything has a field. And those fields are influencing each other. So if your field is vibrating this is the third law, the law of vibration, and we can review these, is vibrating at a level of rage, a level of judgment. How dare the world be so messed up, and how dare people exist and be so bad, and blah, blah, blah. You're holding a vibration that is informing that field that is unified. So you're just putting more of the same crap out there and wondering why things haven't changed. You have to come to a place of love as your motivator. I love the world so much. I want more for it. I want better. I want to change it because it is worthy of my love, not because I want to punish it and show it how wrong it is.
So anger is, a huge motivator. So if you do feel like anger for things that have gone wrong, how do you then change that and channel it into love so you can actually, get some stuff done?
Anger might be a huge motivator, but love is a bigger one. You've done more outrageous things in the name of love than you have in the name of fear. You've taken more bold action in the name of love. You've committed your life to another human being and made humans with them. There is no more huge an act of love than that. To ever believe that we're more motivated by our rage than we are by our love is simply misguided, because you love the world so much that you're hurting when you see the injustices, whatever the number one thing is for you, whether it's vulnerable children, whatever it is, whatever is the thing that most triggers you, it's your love for that thing. So you need to understand, as we all do, not you specifically, but the idea that love is the highest vibration. So all emotions or all feeling states have a vibration. So this is the law of vibration, the third law. And the third law states that everything is vibrating particles of matter. This is the densest part of our vibrating particles of matter. So we can see it. And because we're lazy, we just go, well, that's all I am. That's the extent of my influence on the world. The truth is, every emotional state that you spend time in is programming that field of oneness. So if you are feeling great fear and anger and rage towards the injustices of, say, children being abused, your fear and rage is contributing to that vibration of the whole environment. Let's stick to the planet for now. Let's say the whole planet is vibrating. Because there's so much fear, we're holding a very low vibration, and that vibration is contributing to more of the same. So it's actually an act of inner discipline, or what Vishen Lakhiani calls blisscipline. You need to find a way to transmute your rage back into love in order to take right action. And until you do that, you're just using your anger as a means to justify sitting in a low vibration and expecting things to be different. It's a redundant kind of argument to say, I'm so angry that, and everything's so unjust. The way that we can start doing this is to really release ourselves from the burden of believing in solid matter. We don't need to be spiritual to do that. We need to educate ourselves about things like quantum physics. So for the last 100 years, science has been telling us, very good science has been telling us, that we are energy, not physical, solid matter. And yet, a little bit like how Galileo must have felt when he was trying to convince everybody that the world was not flat, we have been very slow to pick up that understanding, and not just at the level of, you and me in our lives, non-scientists in the world, but at the level of science. Science has been very unwilling and slow to pick up this conversation, and that's because it is absolutely paradigm shifting. What happens when we start to truly understand the quantum physics that is coming forward and has been for the last 100 years is we have suddenly got great personal responsibility for the state of the world. And we suddenly have to take that responsibility in order to see change happen. For example, the double slit experiment. I'm sure you would have heard of this, but I'll explain it briefly. The scientists wanted to demonstrate whether particles, subatomic particles, behaved as waves or as particles moving through the world. And I'm not a scientist, so my language is not 100% great, but the science is right. And so they did a double slit experiment, and each scientist observed the particles. And based on their expectations, the particles behaved according to the scientists' expectations. One observation was of waves and the other was of particles moving. There are no watches in the quantum field. Your observation of the world is determining how the world shows up. This is science. This is not spiritual. So now that we know that everything is vibrating particles of matter and our feeling states determine the rate at which those particles are vibrating, you understand that the low vibrating emotions of fear, rage, anger, jealousy, hate, all of those are keeping us in a paradigm that we say we don't want to be living in, but we're not willing to take personal action to commit to holding a higher vibration. Spiritually fierce is, I am so in love with humanity and the world, that I want to be the cause of the end of suffering. So I'm going to overcome my judgment of the world. I'm going to stop telling the world how bad it is and what a terrible job it's doing and how all the bad people are bad. And I'm going to take full responsibility and say, well, the law of mentalism tells me that I am one with all. So that thing that I'm judging as bad is me. How do I take personal responsibility if I'm not willing to see everything as an aspect of myself? We know this, if we just bring it back to very human terms for a moment. Often you'll have a friend or a colleague, and the quality in them that shits you the most is the thing that you don't want to own about yourself. Agreed? Yeah, we've all had that experience where we're like, oh, that person is so blah, blah. I just can't stand that. And someone else goes to you, you're just like that. And you're like, I am not. And you're so angry because that quality frustrates you so much in the other person. But it's because it's what we call the shadow. It's an unmet part of yourself. And here is really the kicker. This is how you do this, Leandra, is that you have to go and meet your fear. So if you want to be a cause for good in the world, you have to see that you are a microcosm of the whole. So you are a tiny fractal. Each piece contains the image of the whole. So you are a tiny fragment of whatever it is that you want to believe in. For me, that's God. I'm very comfortable with that word, as is everything else in my view of the world. But if I'm sitting here saying that's bad, that's good, blah, 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 I'm separating myself from that which I am, according to science, judging it as good or bad and holding a low vibration around it. You know, if I want to change the world, I need to be willing to take ownership of the stuff that I'm scared of and angered by. And then I can take personal responsibility by taking action. But the action comes afterward, because the reality that we live in is not physical, it's quantum. So you must sit in your meditation. You must practice your forgiveness practices. You must train yourself in the art of gratitude and learn how to change your vibration at will. And then when you take action in the world, you're taking it from the highest vibration possible, and all of your actions will be exponentially increased in power.
So why do we mistake love sometimes as like pushy aggression?
We assign a lot of unloving things to the name of love, you know, and if we talk at a personal relationship level, the things that we do in the name of love are sometimes very unloving. Manipulating our partners, for example, because we're terrified that they will leave us. So we attempt to moderate their dreams or aspirations, because what if they follow those dreams and suddenly we're redundant in their lives? To say to someone, hey, I love you so much, don't go and do that thing that you want to do, that thing you really love. Stay on the couch and cuddle me, because if you loved me, that's what you do. You know, we can, I'm sure you're not, but we can a lot of the time use the word love when actually what we mean is fear. So love is actually a very complicated word. It's a very big word. And it's interesting, you know, when I teach people to hold their vibration high, we actually don't use the word love at all, because love is such a complex word. We have all suffered at the hands of love. We've all given more than we should have at the hands of love. You know, we do have a very complex and not loving relationship to love much of the time. But in answer to your question, you know, when we look to the great leaders, we see their passion, and we might think that what's motivating them is fear or anger or rage or, you know, at the injustice of it all. Those speeches that you're recalling stay in your mind because what you can feel is their love. Yeah, you can feel their transformative potential. If they were just up there, because we've also seen just really angry people ranting and being angry. No one's moved by that. What love does is it gives you hope. And those qualities of those leaders that you mentioned is that they inspire. So even though their words are strong and forceful at times, their message is about hope and inspiration. You know, even if we go back to the great spiritual teachers, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, you know, looking at people like Jesus or Mahatma Gandhi, you know, their message was love, but their actions were often having to take real hard action in the world that was not soft and gentle and passive. So I think it's very much about being unafraid of our big emotions, being unafraid of letting us experience the full spectrum of emotions. Just as that beautiful anecdote of your daughter being called fierce at kinder, you know, there are lots of environments where we are taught from a very young age not to be fierce. We're taught to be polite, and we're domesticated. And we're also taught that it is not our job to stand up for the world. We're taught to find someone, make babies, buy a house, get a mortgage, be ordinary, go to the shops, don't ask too many questions, get a comfortable car, upgrade that car, get a bigger TV, subscribe to Netflix, don't cause trouble, agitate for the things that are going to be good for your little piece of the world, but don't think about the world at a global level. We are taught from a very young age, and I'm sure your kids aren't, but, a lot of us are taught to live within very narrow expectations. And that is a very easy way for us to lose sight of our truth. So when we see power, fierceness, fully expressed in another human being, some of us may never have met that before. And we may find ourselves confronted, but that isn't a good enough reason to look away. It's a good opportunity to say, where am I unwilling to meet my own power? Because with great power, as we know from Spider-Man, comes great responsibility. Do I actually want to own my power? Because then I'm going to have to look around my nice little life, and maybe things are going to have to change. Maybe it's not going to be enough for me just to carve out my own little piece of happiness while billions of people around the world are dying, enslaved, abused, just so that I can feel safe. How do we feel safe when the world is so out of balance? So waking up to the truth of reality does not mean we have to do that through rage and anger. We might go through those emotions because I think they're quite normal, but ultimately our actions must be taken from that place of hopefulness, inspiration, and wanting to lead others. A great leader can't lead through fear. Ultimately, it will come undone. They might have a good go at it for a while, but those women and men that you mentioned, they lead through love.
For people like me who do have very fierce children, how do you navigate this? Because they challenge you, especially, kids are, do you have kids?
Yes.
Yeah, they're fantastic for that, right?
Yes.
How do you nourish it, but still at the same time not lose your shit at your kids every single day because everything is like, well, why? Why do I have to do this? Because they are so in their own little...
I wish I knew the answer. I do. I don't think I am a particularly great parent. I think that I am trying, the very best that I can come up with, Leandra, is to lead by example. So I live my life in its fullest expression. And sometimes that means that my children's needs are secondary to the needs of my soul and my purpose. And I do talk about this a lot. I don't know in the day-to-day necessarily, but for me it means getting a lot of support and a lot of help, getting really good people to help in the caregiving of my children. Because my life, I feel very clearly, is much bigger than my role just as a mother and a partner, and I spend so much time away from them. I just have really good proxies because I need that level of support. But I think that on a more kind of everyday kind of mundane level where it's like, oh my God, we just need to go to the shops and I need you to keep your pants on and I need you to not scream at the people who are trying to do their shopping. It goes back to what we were saying before. We need to be functioning in the world. We need to be creating resilient, robust, viable children. And for me, the best way to do that is to show them who I am in my leadership and my power, but also to make them feel very safe to function in the world. To kind of bring that back a little bit, I'm trying to think more practically. Pick your battles. We say this all the time as parents, but, I have two very robust boys. And until recently, it absolutely was never going to happen that I would go to cafes or restaurants. It just wasn't their environment. So why would I keep inflicting that upon them? I just chose to go to places if I was going to meet with other people communally where they could run free, because I don't want to be screaming at them the whole time, to sit down and drink their baby chino when their nature is to run. So I would either find a place where they could run, or we just wouldn't meet in those kinds of environments because it just doesn't work for their nature. Finding ways that you can meet your child where they are, not expecting your child to want to have the life that you have. I think a lot of our tensions with our children come from trying to fit them into an adult world when they are not interested in an adult world. Beyond that, really seeing the privilege of these are human beings who for a time are in my care, who have come through my body but are not my possessions and have nothing to do with me. Their choices and the way they live their life will ultimately have nothing to do with me. Whilst I am the caregiver and they're at a vulnerable age, I will be the best caretaker that I can. But their happiness is nothing to do with me. As in, my happiness is not determined by them, is what I'm trying to say. I say this all the time. Don't tell me your children are your why. That's the most fucked up statement I've ever heard. If your whole purpose on this planet is your children, then they haven't got a chance, because they will never get to be self-determining, self-actualizing human beings. They're constantly going to have to be meeting your emotional needs because you haven't taken the time to figure out what's your purpose. They are simply being brought through the vessel that is you, and you've got to do the best job you can to get them to the point where they will leave you, because that is the highest form of success. We've completely overemphasized the role of mothering, I believe. I believe we've absolutely got a disproportionate expectation of mothers, and we've also created incredibly useless people. Our children are often not taught about resilience and viability. They're not taught how to trust their own judgment. They're not taught about self-determination or self-actualization. We're constantly berating them and forcing them into our vision of what they should be, so often informed by our own sense of lack. So that's a really ranty answer to that. And in a practical sense, I don't know what that means. Move to a farm. Often I've thought, what I actually need to do is live on a farm and homeschool my children. All my ideas of hell. But I would be very happy, I think, to see them in that sort of environment. In the meantime, we just muddle through. Every day is different. One of my children has a mild intellectual disability and every kind of diagnosis under the sun. And we just muddle through. And we get a lot of really good support around us, because that is how I become the best version of me. I absolutely am not here to be a mother first.
I think that's like the best parenting advice I've ever heard, because I think as mums, we've really definitely been conditioned to think that, no, you become a mum, that's who you are now, and it defines us so much. And even, when we go to kinders and things, like, I am Asher and Eden's mum, like, I'm the mum. And a friend of mine actually highlighted something for me, that my husband and I are both chiropractors, and at the kinder drop-offs, if he's there, people talk to him about chiropractic and work and things, whereas if I'm there, people talk to me about mum stuff. She's like, I just find it interesting, because you're the same profession, you still go to work, but because I'm the mum, that's what I'm sort of more defined as, whereas he gets to be lots more other things.
Yeah, I find it quite terrifying, actually. There was an article in one of the Fairfax newspapers last week, which was talking about how the dissatisfaction that women feel with mothering and the real kind of shock that was to them. And it isn't a surprise that it's a shock, because in response to the article I read, she said, women have been groomed, and that's a heavy word. We talk about grooming children for abuse, for mothering since birth. So we have groomed little people, little girls, to believe that the highest accolade or achievement in their life is to reproduce. And we do it with such zealousness that we are about 5 billion people past the point where we can actually sustain life. So when we run out of oil, for example, if we haven't come up with an alternative, we have literally bred the planet into an environmental crisis. We have enslaved women, because once you have a child, that child's needs, and this is where it's really interesting, because it's very hard to talk about this stuff without people accusing you of not loving your children. I love my children more than my own life. Of course I do. But that is part of the problem, because once you have a child, if you're of sound mind, the love that you feel for that child will mean that you do become vulnerable. You will protect your child at any cost. So economically, you're vulnerable. You're suddenly dependent on a partner. If that partner leaves, if you're left in single motherhood, there's very little chance that if you haven't sustained your own career, that you're going to be able to support that child or those children on your own. We're emotionally enslaved to the people we have children with, and we're constantly managing our intuition as mothers. We're constantly moderating our response, because we are taught, we either have to defer to our partner, or we are in a situation where we're trying to keep the peace in the home. We don't know how to do that without compromising. So on every angle, we're compromising. We don't have mothers in their full power, because we have created as a kind of such an economic detriment to become a mother. This is a very complex argument, and I'm not doing it justice, but I feel very, very clearly that, exactly as you're saying, we are we are groomed for a job that we then cannot necessarily tell if we actually want to take or not. But by the time we get to reproducing age and we partner up, we're so completely programmed with that story that I'm not sure we even know how to make a choice out of free will. And the women that do, we look at very suspiciously, or we say, oh, they'll change their mind eventually.
Mm-hmm.
In all honesty, if I knew what I know about being a mother now, I wouldn't choose to have children. I just wouldn't. Of course I love my children. Now that I've got them, love them. I believed before I had children that I would be a particular kind of mother. I believed that I wanted a particular kind of life. This is very, very personal. I'm not trying to say this is the same for everybody. But when I reflect on it now, I wonder how much of it was through this kind of subconscious programming that's going on, subconscious and very overt programming that happens for women. Do we actually know what we want? Do we know how to get back to that wild, intuitive knowing that does know what we want? So I guess that's what I would like to raise my children with, is absolute certainty of what it is that they want rather than what is being put upon them by the world or by me or by anybody who's part of their caregiving.
Interestingly enough, my 4-year-old asked me the other day, why do people do what everyone else does and not what they want to do?
Freaking genius.
Like, that's a great question. Why do you think? And she's like, I think people should just do what they want to do.
But she's just so on it. And if you can do anything as a parent, cultivate that. Ask questions. I think that's the thing, is that we don't ask questions. We don't ask enough questions. Like, why do we live in these isolated little nuclear families, which we know don't survive 50% of the time, which because of divorce, not because someone takes them out, that does happen sometimes, but that entrenches us in economic slavery because we actually can't afford, most of the time we will have lifelong debt, that isolates us from communities, that keeps us effectively living for 4 weeks a year so that we can have our little break from our life because we're working in ways that don't actually work for us. Why are we doing that? The answer to most of those questions is because of capitalism, because it's a really good economic model, because if everybody has to buy their own washing machine, if everybody needs their own 10 TVs or however many they need, if it works for the financial system. So the nuclear family came out of, the First or Second World War, I believe, that idea of living in isolated suburban blocks where there were fences between us all, and we stopped pooling resources and we stopped living in a sense of community, and we became these isolated little fragmented individualized groups who are usually just barely in survival mode. And, we don't say why. Why are we doing this? Monogamy. Why? Why are we doing this? If we didn't have monogamy as a rule, our marriages would probably last all of our lives, because so often people go outside of the marriage, not because they don't love the other person, but because they just want to have sex with someone else. Like, I don't have an open marriage, by the way. I'm not saying this from firsthand experience, but I'm interested in all the rules. Vishen Lakhiani is another great word he comes up with, is rules, bullshit rules. These things that we inherit without asking questions, without saying why is it like this? And is that right for me? So now, as a mother and a partner, I don't cook, I don't clean. I like to do as little of my childcare as possible. I've chosen the very best childcare givers, the best schools, all of that kind of stuff for my kids. My sense of purpose is bigger than this home, and my partner has a very successful career as well. So we need a lot of support around us to make that work. Some people say to me, how do you do it? And I'm like, well, if you looked at it from the kind of cultural perspective, you would probably say I'm a shit mum. But I don't have any doubt about the kind of mother I am. I know my children are learning about their own sense of connecting to purpose and power, and that they will do it much younger than I did, because there is no one telling them what it is that is good or bad, that they're going to figure all of that stuff out for themselves.
And speaking of being a mum, like, the word fierce is used a lot to describe a mum, like a fierce mama bear. I feel like it's almost a bit better. Like, if a woman's called fierce, like I said, Beyonce and the Kardashians and stuff kind of made it okay and kind of like, oh, it's a bit cool. But it hasn't typically been a particularly nice way to describe a female recently.
We don't like our strong females. We don't. We're terrified of them. Culturally, not individually, but culturally, we are very, very scared of fierce women. And we'll usually find some way to malign their character. We do it to female politicians all the time. We'll go to great lengths to find out who they slept with, or why they didn't have children, or why they're not married, or why they haven't fulfilled all the cultural norms that women are supposed to fulfill. And then we'll question their kind of, their moral fiber as a result of those choices that they've made. I just have to say, don't ever put the Kardashians and Beyonce in the same bag again. Oh, my God.
I know.
Beyonce is just so good and has done so much to change. We put women, strong women, self-determining women, so often we will find ways to talk about them that are dismissive. So stories will be leaked about female celebrities who wouldn't do whatever they were asked to do on set, and they will be described as difficult, hard to work with, not playing the game. The game is the man's game. We live in a patriarchy. So if there's a woman who won't play the game, more power to her. But we are not taught that that is safe, and we're also taught to judge other women as from a very, very young age. And one of the practices that I use if I'm looking at a woman, even the Kardashians, God bless them, because they are strong women and they have done incredible things. I would just love it if they turned it outwards a little bit more, but that's my judgment, and I'll just have to do it more for myself. We are very unsafe with women who are strong, and we assume that somehow there's a problem or we're going to be negatively affected by that. So we will, as women, criticize and contribute to that culture. Gossip magazines are men don't read gossip magazines. It's women who read gossip magazines. So we're taught to judge each other on very superficial terms from a very, very young age. So it's, we live in a patriarchy, and the female body is part of the mechanisms of sustaining that patriarchy. And we need to wake up. We need to be unafraid of our fierceness. We need to ask our children questions about, when my 4-year-old, who he's just turned 5 actually, he says, who am I going to marry when I grow up? I'm like, I hope you're not going to marry anybody, because you don't have to marry anybody. Marriage is an outdated institution that's designed to keep you in kind of an economic slavery to the system. And he goes, okay, I was going to marry that girl from kinder. I'm like, but, don't, the thing is, Leandra, it's like everything. You have to be walking your talk. You can say whatever you like to your kids, but if you are participating in the world in the way that you don't want them to replicate, then you might as well go and smoke a cigarette and get drunk in front of them, because they're looking at your actions. They're not listening to your words.
Exactly. Like my baby is having some issues with me going back to work, but my idea is that this is what a woman does. Like, I need to go back to work because I love my work. I love what I do. And she'll get over it. Like, I'm not leaving her a crack den to get drunk. Like, I'm leaving her with her family. Interestingly enough, my 4-year-old's I talk to my 4-year-old very much the same. We were talking about International Women's Day and about strong women. And we just got Rebel Stories for Girls. And, she really loves the Cleopatra one. And we talk all about this, and we talk about, and so she's like, I don't want to get married. I want to run away to Paris and own a bakery. I'm like, sure. I'm like, if you want to get married though, it's okay. Your choices are your choices. I'm like, I got married. It's fine. But whatever. And she's like, and it's funny because when she goes to a Steiner kinder, and they're very much about attachment. And I was very much saying that she's not going to miss me. She's going to be fine. And her kinder teacher's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, but no, she is. Like, that's who she is. She's just, she's very sure of herself. And I don't know if it's me, but it's just one of those things of like, well, we'll just let her be. Like, there's no.
Yeah. We do create a lot of problems. Yeah. And the other thing is, if we take credit for anything our kids do, we're either going to be really disappointed or we're going to be giving ourselves props for things we have not done, because you're already seeing in your 2 children that you've probably parented in the same way. They're having a very different reaction to separating from you. But that's their nature, their personality. But here's the thing. If you're on an aeroplane and you hit some turbulence and you're terrified that the plane's going to go down, what do? You look to the flight attendant, and if their face is calm and they're serving their coffee and nobody's batting an eyelid, you go, oh, everything's okay. And it's exactly like that with parenting. The second law of the cosmos is the law of correspondence, which is as within, so without. If you're on the outside all like, everything's good, but on the inside a complete quivering mess about your choices, about going back to work, about leaving your kids, going to the third law, the law of vibration, children are just picking up your vibes. That's as simple as it is. Everybody is picking up your vibes. So you need your vibration to be in correspondence with what you're feeling. So for you, I can feel that you're really cool with your choices. That means that your child will be really cool with your choices. They will take a little while to change because change is difficult for everybody, but it gets less so the more you practice it. The truth of it is that we mostly are sitting in all of our own unmet fear, passing that on to our children and wondering why our children have attachment issues or this kind of issue or that kind of issue. It's like, meet your own shit. Take responsibility for your crap. Don't try and change them. Change yourself because you are them. Everything is one. So you can't sacrifice yourself on the cross of motherhood, be the martyr for motherhood and expect to create robust, resilient, independent, viable little human beings. What you're teaching them is that they should feel guilty and ashamed and depressed and sad and anxious because you've made all of those choices in some kind of, false sense of this is what a mother does. Who said so? I see how we have enslaved women to the story, and there'll be women who will be angry because they will believe that their absolute free will, their own personal choice is to mother and that's it. So what happens in 18 years' time? What happens?
The one thing that you dedicated your life to has now flown. They've gone. They're completely independent, and that's exactly what you wanted. And then you're literally left with nothing because for the last 18 years, that's all you did.
So if that is the case, if they have literally flown, that means you've done something right. The chances are, though, that they've flown with a lot of your emotional hooks in them and a lot of fear that if they don't kind of contact you frequently enough, or they've run from you because they don't know how to deal with your emotional chaos all the time, that sense of manipulation. This doesn't have to be at a conscious spoken level. This is all subconscious. This is at the level of the quantum, the vibrating particles of matter. If you're raising children to feel guilt and shame for being independent of you, then you are basically contributing, you might as well have kept them locked in your house because that is the result. They're not actually genuinely free. My husband has a friend who lives in the US. He'd love to come home to Australia, but he's never found a way to resolve his relationship with his mother because she's so controlling that his only hope is to stay on the other side of the world and come home once a year. So all of that sense of, he's an independent guy. Look how well he's doing. He's not. He's in hiding. So to create genuinely free human beings, we have to be free of their need for anything, approval or otherwise, love or otherwise. We have to see ourselves as caretakers, and we have to remember that the most precious life that we have is our own. It's our own life.
Parenting advice ever.
But, there'll be a lot of people, you've got to meet their developmental needs, of course. You've got to live with love. You want to make them feel safe. All of those things don't get discounted. And that's the thing. The problem is the arguments or conversations around parenting become polemical. It's either all or nothing. You're either enslaved to the role of mothering and you give up everything, or you fit your stuff in around everybody else's needs very guiltily. I just don't wife at all in my life. I don't do it because I have so much stuff I need to be doing, and everybody still eats. Do you know what happened when I stopped cooking? My husband started cooking.
Oh, look at that.
Oh my God. It just didn't matter. And look, and whatever, like my job is not to feed him. I make sure my children are fed sometimes. I get other people to do it a lot of the time. But the idea that we are, love is put yourself last. It's just slavery, and it's designed to keep women away from their fierceness. It's designed to keep women away from their power and their purpose. The highest ideal, the highest vision of a woman that we have in this world is as a mother and a wife. And there ain't no power for us in that. That's us in service to other people, not in service to our big vision and purpose. So whilst we're being co-opted, and because we have a natural propensity and capacity to love at such a deep level, we've been exploited. This is strong words, but I'm standing by them because our F word is fierce.
It is. So what about this term of like the fierce mama bear then?
Oh, I think that's, the image that comes to mind for that is the Hindu goddess Durga, who rides her lion. And, she is the fierce mother. She loves her children so fiercely that she's not afraid for them, and she's not containing them. She's not keeping them domesticated. She's not asking them to be polite and drink baby chino when they want to be running naked around the farm. She's freeing them to be the freest versions of themselves. And when she needs to, she protects and guards them. But mostly it's not the world that our children need protecting from, it's us. Why can't we feel safe for our children to feel their big, scary emotions? We are constantly trying to make our children not feel anything. We're constantly micromanaging their lives. We're telling their teachers how to teach them. We're telling them which class they need to go into. We're cutting off people whose kids don't love our children and bow down to them. You know, we wrap them in these little balls of cotton wool and prevent them from learning how to trust themselves, how to become resilient and viable human beings. We're trying to protect them from feeling any negative emotions ever. So how do they learn? How do they learn? Well, what they learn is that those emotions are not safe, and like all of us, to use addiction to cover up those feelings. So to eat too much, or to eat too much sugar, or to drink too much alcohol, or whatever it is that as adults they will use as their strategies for not feeling the full expression of their emotions. What if we just let it be okay that there will be days where our kids will get bullied, and rather than going into school and trying to, you know, cut down the kid who's bullying your child, we talk to our child about the nature of bullying, and we explain what causes that and why some children will behave in that way. You know, that doesn't mean that after a week of this happening that we just lie down and let our kid be bullied. It means that we teach our child first about personal responsibility, and then if we need to go in on our lion into the school and you know, raise some hell, we do that. But we do it from a place of love, and we do it from a place of proactively supporting our children to become the most viable versions of themselves, not trying to protect them from the world. The world is full of pain and suffering. The children in our lives cannot be protected from that. We don't want it to be a shock to them when they step into adulthood that sometimes some people will behave badly. We want to equip them with the skills to manage those interpersonal relationships, to manage the difficult situations, to trust their intuition and their wild knowing.
So this fierce mama bear, again, from a place of love, not a place of fear and anger.
Not a place of, I have to protect my child from every possible version of not awesome. Yeah. You know, life will sometimes be challenging. But if we go back to the third law, the law of vibration, you know, the people who stay in really, really bad, unhealthy, passive-aggressive relationships because it's good for the kids, those children are picking up vibration, not words. So you might hide your arguments and keep them till the kids have gone to bed. But the energy in that home is oppressive. The energy in that home is teaching the child that it's not safe for them to express what they're feeling. It's not safe for them to have their needs met. It's not safe for them to love, you know, that everything about that is, if this is what is done in the name of love, you know, then how do we teach our children what love is, and how love sometimes will be fierce and uncomfortable and difficult? You know, we're creating a very dangerous climate for ourselves where these people are not able to function in the world, and we're seeing that everywhere we look. There's a mental health epidemic in the West. You know, we have incredible rates of addiction. We do not give our children what they need to learn to trust themselves. And do you know why? Because we don't trust ourselves, because no one taught us.
So what would be your one small step for our listeners to, you know, unleash their spiritual fierceness?
It's not really a small step, but it is something that can be practiced daily, and that is to practice choosing love. So there's a very simple technique you can use for that, which is, for everything you want to do, ask yourself the question, is this love or is this fear? And that very simple question, that self-reflective question is, okay, so little Sadie's climbed to the top of the climbing frame and you're shaking in your boots and terrified because she's never climbed that high and she's only 5 and she's going to fall down and break her neck, obviously, so she needs to get down. So you start screaming, Sadie, get down from there now, you're going to die. And instead of letting her have an experience, you know, obviously we have to protect our children, but she's actually good. She's fine. She's like a mountain goat. She's climbing beautifully. You would take a moment looking at your child up there, feeling your fear, knowing that that fear might have more to do with you than her. And you would say, is it a choice for love or fear? If I get her to come down right now, even though the chances are she's going to be okay. And if she falls, there's a chance that she'll learn a little bit more about how to climb and be more discerning next time, rather than it being the catastrophe which you've imagined, which is, you know, neck break into Royal Children's Hospital and it's the end of your child's life. What if you just moderate your response? Okay, I can see in this moment that my own fear, because I'm not very good at climbing, is making me restrict her natural free expression. So I'm just going to sit on my feelings, and instead of just screaming at her to get down the second that I think about it, I'm going to see if I can just sit with that uncomfortable feeling, because mostly we're trying to avoid our uncomfortable feelings. And then she safely climbs down, and you can say to her, oh my God, that was incredible. Hey, maybe next time just call me over so that I can be there in case there is something and you do fall, I can back you up. But you're not shitting your fear all over her and causing her then to have a fear response to either stop climbing or to feel this kind of constriction in the next time she climbs. Why am I feeling that feeling? It's because you've turned what is a moment of great achievement for her into something that is fear-inducing and stress-inducing. So is it love or is it fear? For anything. When you go to put the food in your mouth, am I loving myself right now? Or am I eating this entire box of Cadbury chocolate out of fear because I'm judging myself for whatever reason? Just be conscious of your choices in each moment. And if you need to, for the first few days, write it on each wrist, love or fear, and remind yourself that you may be making choices in the name of love that are actually fear choices.
I like that because it's true. Like, I mean, my husband says it to me the same time. Like, Asha went down the slide once, face planted, I flipped out. And the next time she went down the slide, I was like, oh my gosh, just can you be, and my husband's like, don't give her your fear. Like, don't. Yeah, she slipped once, but doesn't mean she'll do it again. And I was like, oh, you're so right.
Yeah. And mostly the risks that we give our children, if we make them risk-adverse human beings, they will never meet the full expression. They will never know themselves. That point that we began at the beginning, know thyself is the most central spiritual edict that there is. It's inscribed at the temple of Apollo at Delphi. It's like, how do we get to know who we are if we're constantly being told to avoid risk? The playground is a very safe place for your child to take risks. And even there, what we're actually terrified of is losing our children. So we're not in the present moment with them on the slide. Some part of us has gone to the future where we don't have that child because something happened and maybe their life was lost or whatever it is, whatever our greatest fear is. And for mothers, it's usually the loss of their children. So we're not actually with our child in the park having a good time. We're projecting into an imaginary future where them face planting means that they're going to sustain a head injury, which means they're going to die. We're so far into that we can't be fully present to child fell down, child gets up, good on you. Look at the flight attendant on the plane. I'm good. You good? We're good.
Yeah. Like, my child fell out of a tree at kinder the other day and I'm like, you're fine. Like, that was scary. You were scared, but you're okay. Like, nothing broke. You're all fine. We're good. Like, we're good.
Yeah. And even if something did break, bones break. That's the thing, like, there is actually nothing that can be excluded from this when we get really good at practicing this, that whatever happens, if we're able to see it as part of just life happening. My favorite mantra that I actually have tattooed on my arm and I've written an article about, what if there is no problem? What if the events of your life and your child's life are just life happening and we moderate our emotional response to them so that we're not pumping out a constant fear-based emotion all of the time. We're just saying, oh, okay, so you fell out of the tree and you broke her arm and now we're going to go to the hospital and you're going to get that arm fixed and we're going to have an adventure together while we do that. We're changing the nature. We're changing our nervous system response in ourselves and in our children. We're not predisposing them to live in a stress response all of the time. But there is nothing that happens that if we are able to stay in that place of calm, hence the very first point we came to, which is, yes, you have to begin with your Zen-like meditation practice because you have to have that as your anchor. Otherwise, when you go out into the world to change it or to change anything, you're coming from that chaotic rage emotion or fear-based emotion, which will be ineffective in the extreme.
Well, that makes so much sense. That's good. Like, you are the center. I get that. So become the center. You can be Zen-like all the time, but it doesn't mean that Zen-like is I sit back in my house and let things wash over me and nothing happens. It's that Zen-like then follows you into the world when you do things so that when stuff does come at you, you can be like, I'm all right. Yeah. That's perfect. Okay. Like, that is okay.
You are the master. Yes, that's exactly right.
Everything is, and that's okay. And that's okay. We do it a lot with my 4-year-old. My husband had surgery on last week and she said, I'm really sad. I was like, and that's okay. She's like, I'm just really sad today. Oh, that's okay. It's okay to feel sad. She's like, oh, right, okay. Yeah. And I mean, and when she says things like, I'm really angry, well, that's okay.
Yeah, just be the full expression of you in that moment, because that's how it will transmute. Otherwise, it's like, don't feel that. No, it's okay. Yeah, have some chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start a lifelong pattern of addiction right there.
Exactly. And you feel nothing. And that's, I'm being a chiropractor, I believe people live in that sort of like cotton wool bubble of, I don't want to feel anything. And I will pop a Panadol as soon as like there's a tiny, tiny ache because I'm so scared of pain.
Yeah.
But it's actually okay. It's all okay. So my last very surprise question is, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Oh God, there's two ways I want to answer to that. One is I do have a superpower, and my superpower is my intuition, and it's my mission to show as many people in the world, but particularly women, that they also have that superpower, and that if they start connecting to it, then they literally are invincible. But, you know, my real answer, I guess, would be to fly. You know, if I could fly, I would love that. What a great superpower.
Flying people, because everyone wants to fly.
Oh, I know, right? But seriously, like, who doesn't? And having just seen Wonder Woman, it's like, you know, even if I could just jump really far like she can, I'd be quite happy with that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the F Words podcast, Fierce. Unlike my daughter, I've never been described as fierce. Well, never to my face anyway. And I guess it's because I'm a people pleaser. Fierce people, I mean women especially, aren't painted in quite a nice light in society, and I'm starting to understand why. When fierceness comes from a place of anger or fear, then it's aggressive. As a leader, you're putting something negative into the world, and you'll not be able to really support and make truly lasting change. Instead, you'll attract followers who are also afraid, who are also angry, and you'll create a mob of destruction. And that's no way to really change anything. So fierceness must come from a place of love. I so love what I'm doing. I so love humanity. I'm so filled with love that I'm actually moved to do something. And in this way, fierce turns from something hard to something soft. And that's what great leaders are made of. So here's what I think. Look to what angers you, what makes your blood boil, because that's where your passion lies. And then meditate on it. Think on it and find the love. Find why you're so angry. Sift through it. Meditate on it, and eventually you will find the reason for why you were so angry. Find the love, then harness your fierceness and go forth and create change. Plus, I love that idea of writing love and fear on your wrists. I think it's up there with all the imaginary tattoos I want to get but never really will. But now I want to know, have you ever been called fierce, and do you think it's a good thing?